Record. All right, good evening. This is the AP Stats Review for linear regression, and we're going to begin by going over the quiz today. So the question was a regression analysis on the relationship between average annual profits in millions of dollars. And so, okay, we know we see the word between, so we know we're making a comparison. So annual profits of insurance companies and the yearly number of natural disasters. So we're comparing profits and natural disasters. Gives the following output. Now they just told us at that point that it's between two things. They really weren't very specific as to what variable was what. So we have this output, and the very first thing they say is write the regression equation. And please remember, this is extremely critical, that because this is a prediction, this is not the actual y, you must use y hat, so make sure you do that. The Y-intercept is always going to be directly across from the constant. And what I'm going to circle here is extraordinarily important. Right below constant, we have a name. That name is always going to be your x variable. That'll be an always. So if this is disasters, then the other thing that we were comparing was annual profits. That makes annual profits my y or my y hat, as the case may be. All right, so we have a y-intercept of 420.727, and we have a slope of negative 2.70909. So we should be writing the equation y hat equals 420.727 minus 2.70909x. Now, regardless whether or not we asked for it or AP asked for it on a regression equation, you must define y at x. Now, we're not going to try to be tricky. We're going to probably ask you for it, but you must define y at x. However, there is a shortcut to that method. All right? If you write it such that you have profits, which is my y variable, as we said up here, with the hat on top, make sure you have the hat, equals 420.727 minus 2.70909 times the number of disasters. You've actually defined y and x, and you've written the equation all in one step. So that, if you wrote this right here, that actually takes care of A and B according to College Board. I have not been a fan of that, but College Board likes it, so consequently we totally accept it. All right? I always sit there and write it out. Then I define x and y. And in this case, x was the number of major natural disasters, and we see that right here. This is always going to be the x, and this will always be the slope next to the x. And our y is the amount of profit the insurance company makes in millions of dollars. All right. The next thing says identify the slope. Well, we did identify the slope. We've already circled it in at negative 2.70909, and I highly recommend that you do this, even on the multiple choice, okay? I'm just going to tell you, I've seen so many students make a careless error on the multiple choice, and they would not have done it if they would have done this one simple thing. Put it over 1 and label it. So we have profits over major disaster. Try to spell disaster correctly, all right? Obviously I didn't, all right? And please go ahead and put those labels there. And not that that's, and honestly, if you, this alone is not going to get you full credit, but it will help you out on the multiple choice. Obviously, we're not checking your work on multiple choice, but I'm telling you, I've seen so many people miss multiple choice, smart students miss multiple choice answers just because they didn't put the label there. And they would have gotten it because they messed up on the interpretation. So, for every 1 increase in the number of major disasters, there is a decrease in profit of 2.7907. So I need to make sure that I have the 1 increase in what it is and the decrease in whatever it was. Super important, all right? All right, the next thing, it says identify the y-intercept and explain the meaning and context of the problem. I'll be perfectly honest with you. Y-intercept doesn't always make sense. But first off, we identified it as being directly across from the constant. It always will be. So our y-intercept is this. So we stated it. And what it means in this time it actually makes sense. Sometimes it doesn't, but as if x were 0, what would happen? In this case, if there were 0 natural disasters in a given year, the company would expect to make 4.2, I think that's supposed to be 77 million, but, or 73, who knows, my typos. I'm sure you're used to them by now. But in other words, in year 0, in other words, if you had 0 disasters, the company would make $420 million in profit. Okay, that is the mean y-intercept. And then we notice that we have a negative slope, so every time we have a disaster, we're losing some money. And that intuitively makes a little bit of sense. And sometimes it's nice to go back and go, does this intuitively make sense? You're like, hey, the quiz was not that short. I know, but I wanted to make sure I kept it where you could see the problem. So the next thing it says, write the coefficient of determination. First off, coefficient of determination, as I'm sure you know, is just another term for r squared. All right? So r squared equals 46.5. Now be real careful here. For AP statistics purposes, we will never refer to this. And you go, well, why is it there? To confuse you, to throw you off, to increase your chances of missing a point that should have been easy. That's the reason it's there. All right? So what does it mean? This is directly off of page 206. 46.5% of the variation in annual profits can be explained by changes in the number of natural disasters. For the variation in Y can be explained by X. So this was Y and this is X. So the coefficient of determination just tells you the variation in Y that can be explained by changes in X. And that sort of makes sense because our linear model was trying to predict our profits based on the number of disasters. Okay, the next thing, write the correlation coefficient and give its meaning in context. They don't give you the correlation coefficient. However, they do give you r squared. And if you remember the correlation coefficient, the symbol is r. So it's like, oh, if I take the square root of r squared, I get r, and that is almost true. That is almost true. The only thing we have to worry about is the sign of the slope. And the sign of the slope, and boy, I messed it up when I marked on it, the sign of the slope happens to be negative, so we have a negative relationship because every time we have a natural disaster, we're going to lose more money. So if I take the square root of r squared, I end up getting 0.6819, and it happens to be negative because the slope is negative because every time we have a disaster, we lose more money. So the correlation, we state what it is, and there is a moderately strong negative linear correlation. Please note, I need moderately, I need negative, I need linear. Between which two things? Between X and Y, or in this case, I wrote Y and X, and it really doesn't matter the order between those two. The main thing is you need to make sure that you're talking about there is a moderately strong negative, so you have to make sure you say the strength of it, the direction of it, whether it's positive or negative. You need to always tell us it's linear, and between what two variables, in this case, profits and natural disaster. The next thing says calculate and explain what S is in the context of the problem. Realistically, a lot of times S will show up. I can tell you that for us, it's not going to. We're going to hide it from you. All right? And I just want to make sure that you know where it comes from. So the 930.327, if I divide that by 9, I end up getting 103.37. So if I take the square root of the mean square error, I end up getting my standard deviation of the residuals. So S is 10.1671. So the standard deviation of the residuals is, and basically you're just telling them, hey, I know S is a standard deviation of residuals. You're telling them you need to know something. And measures the variance in profits for a given number of natural disasters. I need you to pay careful attention to this. This will help you on a multiple choice test question, or it's likely to, I should say. This is how much we expect actual profits to vary from those predicted by the regression line. All right, this is how much we expect actual profits to vary from those predicted by the regression line. Okay. Then last thing, identify and define the standard error of the slope. The standard error of the slope. We're just going to pay attention to the slope line, which is right here. And this value right here is my standard error of the slope. The standard error of the slope is 0.9694. This is a very long sentence on page 206. Because the slope is estimated from the sample, other samples are likely to have different slopes. The standard error of slope quantifies the amount of variation in sample slopes that could be expected from different samples. For instance, we know we have a negative slope this time, and let's just say it looks something like this. And this is what we predicted. This is our y-hat line. This is our regression line. But I could run it with a different set of data points, and maybe it goes like this. Or maybe it goes like this. The standard error of the slopes just tells me, hey, we know it's a sample. We know there's going to be some variation, and this just tells me how much variation we can expect to have. All right.